Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our series of educational and training webinars. My name is Lisa Helms, and I am with the Customer Success Department. And your presenter today is Daryl Fabro. Some of you may already know him, but he is our Senior Professional Services Consultant and has much expertise with all of our products. So we're glad to have him as our presenter today for the Distribution Manager Part 2 series. For those of you that missed the Distribution Manager Part 1, you can find that recorded webinar, as all of our recorded webinars you can find on the customer portal of our website. If you need to know your web ID, just contact your customer success rep, or you can always call into the help desk to get that web ID as well to have access to our customer portal. The screen that you are seeing now is the Distribution Manager screen, which just gives a little bit of the flow and just some functionality of what it can do just from an overview perspective. Some of the topics that Daryl will be covering today and showing you in detail will be the grouping distributions for one workbook as well as multiple workbooks, formulas in the distribution rows, and then he will go over every option in the settings and what those options represent. So due to the amount of material that we will be covering today, I do ask that you submit any questions via our Q&A box, which is located in the bottom right corner of your screen. We did have a little bit of technical difficulty with that in our earlier session, so if we are not responding to the questions that come up, we will certainly contact each one of you individually to let you know what your answers are, but hopefully all is good for this session. And we will try and answer them, but like I said, if we don't have a chance to reply, your customer success rep will follow up and provide you the answers. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Daryl so that he can demonstrate more advanced functionality of Distribution Manager.
Thank you, Lisa. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to doing this presentation to show our user community how to do some of the more advanced functionality that you're going to find with Distribution Manager. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead. You're currently seeing my desktop, and I'm going to get out of this presentation for a moment and go into Microsoft Excel. And we're going to start our discussion off here in Excel. And our first discussion is going to be executing and running a distribution when I have multiple workbooks that need to be created, but I want the master of all the workbooks to receive a workbook with all of the supplemental worksheets for the members of the group. So again, we're going to be doing grouping, and I want to do a distribution where I have a master spec that receives all the worksheets from all the books as part of its group. An example of that we can see right here is if we were looking at the Distribution Manager at the outputted outputted workbooks that we have. In this situation, the first distribution would create 3 workbooks, and inside the master spec book, we're going to see a worksheet for all the members of the group. So we're going to go through and do the build process for that now. I have pre-built these distributions, so we're going to go ahead and go to the first line, which I want to be my master spec, the spec line that's going to drive the grouping for all the rows below. And again, to maintain the specs for any distribution row, we're going to select the Maintain Specs icon while actively on that row. So now we're seeing all the definitions that go with the distribution. And to define this as the master spec line, I'm going to use this checkbox on the Grouping tab. So this check is going to now set this row as the master spec. I'm going to go ahead and do a push and quit out of the specs, and we're going to go to column T as in Tom. And we're going to see here that this value has now shown up for this this cell, and this represents defining this line as the master of the group. To add the members to be part of the group, I'll select any cell in the row of that member, and I'll select the Maintain Specs. I'll go to the Groupings tab, and I'll come over here and go to the drop-down and select that this is a member of this group. And I do a push and a quit. And to establish the last record for this group, I'll do a Maintain Specs and repeat that step that I just did by going to the Groupings, choosing the drop-down, and choosing the group that this is a member of. I'll push that change through and do a quit. Now I'm going to go over to column T again, and you're going to see the master group is defined in row 4 with this syntax telling you the group number that it is the master of, and each of the members are going to show up below with a 1 in this situation because it's group number 1. So now I'm going to run the distribution for all of these records, all of these distribution rows. I'll select the Distribute button. It will minimize during the distribution. It's going to process the distribution itself, and as it completes, we'll then return to this file folder so that we can see the new books that were created. So I'll come and I'll look at the books, and you can see the timestamp is based on my current time, so we know these books are all new. I'll go into the first line, and we see we only have the 3 sheets, the one for all, for Cost Center 2 and Cost Center 1. So the master has received each of the members as a worksheet. If I come back and launch one of the members, we see that it only contains the cost center specifically for that row. So we were able to run the distribution, and that distribution created 3 workbooks where the master spec line received a worksheet from all of the members. Those calculations and all were done based on the distribution. And in our case, if we look at this in a little more detail, we can see we're modifying a cell to pass the cost center, and we see that here. So that's what's defining what each book will contain. So we're going to take this one step further, and I'm going to have to go and get some information that has been pre-built, and I'm going to copy it over. So I'm going to highlight these 3 rows and bring them over. And I'm going to paste that information in. I'm going to make sure each line has a DM specs greater than, because again, without that value in the cell, the distribution for that row will not run. Now, row 7 is the new group master for group 2. So I'm going to select a cell in that row and define it as being the group master. Again, we'll do a Maintain Specs. I'll go to the Grouping tab, and I will check that this is a group master spec. I'll push that change through and quit. Select a cell in the next row as a member of this group and do Maintain Specs, and go back to Grouping. And as I do the drop down here, you're going to see that I have both members, both group specs showing up, and I need to define which spec this is a member of. I know it's for Company 50. I'll select it and do a push. Now, before, when I was going between spec lines, I was closing the Maintain Specs panel and then relaunching it again on the next line. There is available functionality here by utilizing this button, Retrieve Spec from Current Excel Row. We can tell our current row from the bottom left corner, where the active row here is 4. I'll use my mouse, click on row 9. I see my active row is 9, and I'll retrieve the specs from that row. And now I can make the change specifically for grouping for this line. I'll come to the top, and I'll choose that it is a member for this group, Company 50, and do a push and a quit. So for this distribution, the setup currently is the same. But for this distribution, I only want one workbook. I don't want a workbook for all the members of this group. I only want a workbook for the master spec line so that I can see all the tabs for the different members. The members themselves will not have books. For me to do that, again, I have set the master spec line and the members of that group here in column T, if I make a simple change in column B for the destination type, for row 8 and 9, I don't want a file created, so I'll change that destination from file save, that type from file save to group, and I'll repeat that for the last row. So in this example, row 7 is my master spec line, and row 8 and 9 are members of the group. So my destination folder currently is going to be example 2, and as you see, I already have a book here. I'm going to run my distribution by highlighting rows 7, 8, and 9 because I want all 3 rows to run their distributions. I have 2 options to run this. I can choose the bottom half of the distribute button and choose selected, or I can highlight the rows, highlight any cells within these rows, right-click, and choose Distribution Manager, Distribute Selected. So I'm going to select this and run this distribution. As Excel minimizes, it begins its processing. We do see some dialogue here of how long it will take to process. When returned to Excel, we know that the distribution is complete. I'm going to go to my file folder, and as we can see, we have a new file with the timestamp for current run. I'll go ahead and open that file, and we see I still have the 3 worksheets necessary for what I defined as the execution. Additionally, you're going to notice no other files were created. So by changing the destination type from a file save to a group, I can then run that distribution, and I will only get the master spec line and no members are created. So that's 2 scenarios for distribution. First scenario was I want all 3 workbooks, but the master spec line should have the members included in its workbook. And then again in the next distribution, I have set so I only get 1 workbook and no book is created for the members of the group. You do have the opportunity to create and do mix and match of this, and I'm going to show you that here in an example, and I'm going to go and copy these rows over so I can utilize them here. I'll paste that in, and again, DM specs greater than is required for the row to be considered a distribution row. I know row 10 is my master spec for company 100. I'll do a maintain specs. I'll go to grouping, and I'll define that as a group master spec and do a push. To define my members, I'm going to simply select the cell where the row is, retrieve the spec line, go to the grouping, and define it as a member of this group, in this case, company 100. I'll select it and do a push. I'll repeat that for the next 2 rows. So I'll retrieve my specs, grouping, define the member, push, select, retrieve, grouping, and define again. So that repetitive process was my way of setting what the distribution rows, the spec line is, and then what are the members of that line. And in this situation, I want to mix and match. I do not want a workbook for Cost Center 1, so I will select it as group, where it will become a member of the master spec, but not its own book. And then I'm going to repeat that for row 3. I also want that to be a member. But I do want a workbook created for, in this case, Cost Center 2. I'll select those 4 rows, go to the bottom half of the distribute button, and select distributed to run this distribution. So Excel will minimize, it will complete its distribution, and then Excel will return, and we'll know that that distribution is complete. All the information included in the distributions can be found in the log if you do need to review that in some form or fashion, and I'll show you how to view that log a little later on. I'm going to choose my file folder, choose my destination folder. In this case, it was example 3, and we see I received the master one with 4 worksheets, one for each of the cost centers, and then additionally a book for cost center 2, and it only has its worksheet. I'm going to go ahead and close these books and not save and return back to my original workbook. So you can create mix and matching of whether a workbook should be created or not as part of the distribution. Group is only available when it is a member of a grouping. It cannot be set and run when there is no group assigned. So I caution you, if you are copying and pasting your distribution rows, that when you do that copy and paste, you need to make sure that that group is set back to file save. You can also do a combination of email and file save and group as part of distributions. So a combination of that might be the workbook that's all cost centers, which is your spec line, your master spec, may wish to go out as an email, and the others may be creating file saves or group where they're created or not created. So from these examples, that pretty much outlines grouping, many options that are available for grouping. If you would like to, on your own, to review what grouping is, I'm going to go back to my grouping tab. And this example that falls below this line is a very good example that shows you how grouping works and how groupings can be assigned. So I encourage you to review this and execute some distribution groupings on your own. There are many different needs for this. You can do distributions for your GL-based reporting. You can do distributions for any custom query formula distributions that you may have. So again, if you have questions about this, please reach out to our help desk, and we'll be happy to help you and guide you through building any distributions using groupings. I'm going to continue to talk about distribution, and we're going to change the subject just a little bit from groupings. Now, I'm going to go and I'm going to go over and cut some information over to my screen for our next exercise. And I'm going to intentionally skip a line here just so we can kind of identify these rows that they're different than the ones above. What makes up the difference from these new rows comes into one of the questions that I receive most often when it comes to Distribution Manager. And the questions are, can I put formulas in my distribution rows? And the answer is yes. And in these 4 distribution rows from row 15 through 18, I have created 2 different formulas. My first formula is going to come here in the naming of the file. In this situation, my file name, I know I'm going to run this multiple times in a day. And I need to keep each one of those runs independent so that it doesn't continually replace it. If I don't put a timestamp in, then it will continually replace that same file over and over. Sometimes that is the purpose. We want to replace files. But in this situation, we don't want. So we've added, in our case here, a formula which is taking the text command and converting a now function to include the date and the time as part of its naming convention. So here, as we calculate that cell, we see that the date and the time is showing up, so we know that it is not going to replace our files. So that is a formula that I do see quite often in the naming of files. I see formulas in other locations also. An additional formula that you will see quite often, and a question that I get asked quite often. We're going to see here this in the first column. How do I turn off so a distribution doesn't run when there's no records to send to my users? So that's where it comes in, where we add a formula to this cell, which is the DM spec cell. This DM spec greater than, if that value appears in column A in the distribution control worksheet, it will attempt to run that row as a distribution. Well, in my situation, I don't want that to run as part when there are no values. So I put a formula in place on these 4 rows down here. I'm going to go here so we can take a look at it in my example. In this situation, currently, the balances that I want to run distribution on are 0, reflecting this if statement that I've put in place. So if that cell is 0, the text will be displayed no distribution, so no distribution would run. But if the value is not 0, then it will show DM specs there. If I come and change my balance, my year, so it calculates and I get a balance, you can see the first row and this third row have balances, so distribution should run. When we come to the distribution control and we calculate the workbook, we should now see that formula work, and I need to identify why it didn't work. So one moment, please. Okay, it's just my cell references are off, so one moment here and I will correct that. And as you see, I make these corrections, that DM spec is showing up. So the first row the code showed up, so the distribution would run, row 15, and then again on row 17, based on the calculation, it showed up. So if you can create a check value for your execution, you can assign a formula to that cell to define whether or not that distribution row should or should not run as part of the distribution. So if I were to check and run all distributions on this page, 2 lines would not run, but all the others would run. So that's all I'm going to discuss now on formulas. We're going to move on to another discussion point on distribution. When running distributions, sometimes we have very long run times. It's not necessarily that the formulas are executing and running, it's more that they need to just calculate. Sometimes we have worksheets, workbooks, that have 10 more worksheets, but we're trying to run a distribution to only include one of the 10. So the other worksheets are really not being utilized as part of the distribution. So with that being said, we have the ability to exclude those sheets when running the distribution to speed up the distribution itself. I'm going to select a row here just so I can do a maintain specs and show you that specific setting. When you're working in the specs, on the bottom left, remove non-distributed sheets prior to processing. The key word there is processing. So the thought process here is, by checking this box, if I had sheets that were not included in the distribution, and again, specify worksheets are telling me what sheets are included, in my current distribution, the target sheet is the only sheet I am distributing. But the other sheets are also there and still need to calculate. By checking this box, it will drop all the other sheets and allow the distribution to process. And in that situation, I should see a better response time as part of my distribution. I would encourage you to utilize this and test it out prior to your final run. Situations you may run into is you may have cross-reference formulas from one sheet to another. You will receive pound value or pound ref when those sheets then go to calculate. So you need to confirm that the flow of the data is accurate so that the distribution can be successful. I'm going to push forward here, and we're going to go talk about our settings. I'm going to go to my settings panel. Oh, sorry, I have launched the wrong settings. There are 2 settings when it comes to Spreadsheet Server. I've launched my Spreadsheet Server settings. That is the large settings button. With the Distribution Manager buttons, I have a smaller settings, and I'll go ahead and launch that. And now we're specifically talking about the settings related to Distribution Manager. Earlier I had spoken about your logging. You have the ability to come into your settings and turn logging on, so you can modify and look at what's going on during the distribution. So you can see the steps that Distribution Manager is taking. You may identify some situations where you may want to use that setting to reduce the number of sheets in the book during processing. This is a great way to utilize the logging to know that that is available. So I'm going to go to the next setting here. By default, this setting is turned on, and this setting will automatically save your workbook prior to distribution. Now, there is an Excel function that sometimes this setting can interfere with, and that function is whenever you click the Save icon in Excel and you save a workbook, Excel automatically recalculates your workbook. You may choose to turn that off when using Distribution Manager. That way, when you do run and you do save your book, there is no recalcing of the workbook. So just be aware, this setting does work directly with the setting with Save on Calculation. As we move down, we're going to talk about Consolidate Emails. By default, this checkbox is checked. So what does that mean? That means if I have many distribution rows and a user's email address shows up in multiple rows, it will consolidate all of their emails to one. If they are to receive multiple workbooks, they'll receive one email with those workbooks attached. If you were to unselect this consolidate email, that user would now receive as many emails and workbooks as their email address shows up on. I'm going to go down to the next setting, which is directly related to grouping. We've talked about the grouping, and during my distributions, I was highlighting the rows that included the master spec line and its members, and running them by all or by selected. By choosing this setting and turning it on, all you would have to do to run a group is select the master spec and all the members would run. So this setting helps you if you're doing groupings and you have a lot of different distributions. By choosing this setting, you can execute in a simpler fashion. And again, by default, this setting is turned off. I'm going to move down to the PDF creation settings. By default is the setting in your set for your distribution manager. No PDF creation is defined. In past situations, you're required to have Adobe Acrobat Reader or Writer, so you can then run the distribution by defining the PDF printer. So in the newest versions of Microsoft Office, Office has now included PDF creation in the Save features. So we at Global have piggybacked Distribution Manager off of that to use the Excel Save As PDF function to create those PDFs. This is the setting that I would recommend coming in and changing if you do intend to do PDF distributions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about PDFs while we are here. When you are doing PDF creation and distribution, you do need to define your print area and your print layout. In Excel, if you do not define those, when you do run distributions to PDF, your information is going to lay out based on how Excel defaults page layouts, based on certain column widths and row widths. So you may not be including all of your information whenever you're doing your distribution. So I recommend, and Global recommends, setting your print areas for the distributed worksheets so that the PDFs are created accurately for displaying. This includes defining the page layout. I'm going to go down to convert formulas to values. Within the distribution specs, the default action is the radio button that is currently selected, where global software formulas only will be converted to value. So if you're using a GXL formula, you're using a GEXQ formula, any of the 9 formulas that Spreadsheet Server utilizes will be converted to a value during the distribution. This is the setting when you're in the Maintain Specs panel. If you choose to change that setting, the other two options are convert all formulas to value. This includes your Excel-based formulas, any sums, any if statements, any VLOOKUPs, any Excel-based formula, and all global software formulas would be converted to a value. And then lastly, the default action could be no formulas, no conversion. All formulas will come through as they exist in the book at the time of distribution. Of course, those formulas will calculate as part of the distribution, so it is whatever the reconciled value of that calculation. And again, this is to change the default actions within the distribution manager. And I have a question now. We're going to go ahead and pose that question.
Hi. Yes, we're getting a question. Is there a way to batch the processing of a workbook with distribution control, like to be run by the Windows scheduler overnight?
And the answer to that question is yes. You can schedule your distributions. Now, that is done with the Profile Scheduler. That is another component of the Spreadsheet Server installation. That allows you to schedule your distributions. Now, we're going to have some discussions in future webinars about the Profile Scheduler, but the dialogue when it comes to running when running scheduled distributions requires that there is no interaction by the user. And what do I mean by that? That means when the time comes for the distribution to run, based on the scheduled time, the user cannot be, the screen cannot have a prompt for login or prompt for any type of information when running that distribution. So again, we'll cover this more in the Profile Scheduler, but that is a great question. We're going to go ahead and take another question now.
All right. Does the Profile Scheduler work with Office 365?
And the answer to that is yes. We should work with all versions of Microsoft Office. The current version of Spreadsheet Server that will be coming out soon, it does have some new components to it, but the current versions of Spreadsheet Server are all compatible with Office 365. Okay, I'm going to continue on here and talk a little bit more about some settings. I'm going to go to my email settings here, the top left. You'll notice first thing that Microsoft Outlook Exchange is not checked for me. I intentionally did not install the Outlook add-in. So those of you that wish to run distributions using email, you'll need to make sure that you have this installation completed prior to wanting to do any distributions with Microsoft Outlook. If you do not have administrative rights to your workstation, there's a checkbox that you can check and run it as administrator. You will then be prompted to put in the administrator's ID and password to complete the installation. So again, to install the Microsoft Outlook, you would just simply select that checkbox, select that link, and it would begin the installation. As default, it is not installed. Other options, if you're not using Microsoft Outlook, you do have the option to use SMTP or HTML emails. You would then define the SMTP definitions in the fields below. I'm going to move on to the About screen. On the About, we're going to see a lot of information. The information here is very important when you need to contact Global Software. So there's Global Software's email address and phone numbers for U.S., Canada, and international. There's also a link there for the website. You can send Global Software an email anytime, day or night, and we will process a ticket, and when the first available technical consultant is available, you'll receive a call back, and we'll be able to assist you in that. Additionally, if you call the help desk in after hours, you'll get a call back that evening from the on-call person. So be aware. The website, you can go to the website, and there is a chat feature where you can ask questions directly through the chat, and then if the technician is able to answer your questions right there, they will do so. Otherwise, you'll then have a ticket opened, and then a technician will then contact you that is able to answer your questions and help you through. I want to point out at the bottom left corner of this screen, we have a version of software. I'm currently running Spreadsheet Server version 14.6.3. We are scheduling to release our newest version, which is 14.7, and that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So keep in mind that your versions are important. You want to make sure that you're staying current on your versions at least once a year or every 6 months at best, so that you are making sure you're running the most current available functionality and features that are offered with Spreadsheet Server. And lastly, within the settings, I'm going to show you one more link. It's up at the top right corner, and it's a way to get to the online manuals for all of Global Software's products. So here we have gotten to the Global Software website, and we are seeing the online manuals that are available. So we have the application configurator, Spreadsheet Server, and then of course here is the distribution manager. If you have some of the other analytic tools provided by Global Software, such as Budget Accelerator, and some of the legacy systems, these user manuals are available for your download via PDF or HTML. Additionally, with these manuals, we have software release notes so that you can come in and take a look at what is the newest functionality available with Spreadsheet Server, Distribution Manager, Profile Scheduler, Query Designer, all of these different Spreadsheet Server functionalities. Okay, I'm going to pause now, and we're going to go ahead and take some more questions. Okay, the first.
Yeah, so we got a couple questions. Is Distribution Manager a separate installation?
And the answer to that is Distribution Manager is included in the Spreadsheet Server install. So there's no additional selections, it's just running that installation, and then Distribution Manager is included.
Okay, and then a two-part question. What license type can use Distribution Manager, or can a non-user use Distribution Manager?
Distribution Manager does require licensing of the Spreadsheet Server product to utilize it, so it is not a standalone application, and it would be requiring a license. The license types that use Distribution Manager would be your Platinum and your Gold users. Your Silver or Limited users would not have access to the Distribution Manager buttons that we see here in our Excel session. So on that ribbon, we would not see those buttons.
Okay. If sending an email, can I attach other files in the distribution?
Yes, you can attach other files when you're running distributions. I'm going to go ahead and do a maintain specs on this line, so show you this. If I go to my miscellaneous tab here at the top, I have the ability at the bottom section here to add files, and I have access to get to and add any additional files that I feel necessary. So yes, I can include other files when sending an email.
Okay, why does it send a separate email for each email address? They've used Distribution Manager for sending emails, but each recipient receives a separate email instead of having multiple people on the same email, so they get questions from people if they send it to.
Yes, we do get this question a lot. When Distribution Manager runs, it is sending email as you, as the user of the execution. It is using your Microsoft Outlook or your Exchange, or it's using whatever your email system is. The processing for Distribution Manager requires that only the recipients, and I'm going to go ahead and make a change here so you can see this. So if I go into an email, and then I'm going to put my email address in here, we'll see that if I were to send it, I would only receive an email. I would only see one email as myself. It's not going to consolidate. It's not going to give you all of the users that were part of the distribution. So if you had multiple email addresses, you're only going to see that email for that to that one individual user. A way around this is we suggest creating groups within your email system. So a contact group or an Outlook group, and sending the email to the group. That way you know the group is receiving it. Each individual will still get their own email, but you know that it's going based on that group address as opposed to individuals. There is really no other way around that functionality.
Okay, and we have another one. Is it possible to create one distribution workbook from multiple source workbooks? The example that they're using is they have separate workbooks to maintain balance sheet and income statement. Could they create one distribution list that could combine a worksheet from the balance sheet workbook and a worksheet from the income statement to send one file?
And the answer to that is, Distribution Manager requires that the distribution be within each individual workbook. It will not cross workbooks for its distribution. So in this situation, I have a workbook called DM Grouping. If I had a separate workbook, I would have to have a distribution within that book also. And so it does not currently process across workbooks. So it's not functionality that is available, but I will definitely take it back, and we'll have some discussions with our development team and see if there is ways for us to process multiple distributions across multiple books. Thank you for that. Okay, turn it back over to Lisa now.
Thanks, Daryl. That was a great session. And I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope that you saw some features that you didn't know existed and will be able to use in your day-to-day work operations. If there were some questions that came in, again, this is recorded, and we'll get to all of we had quite a few actually. So anyway, it's recorded, and your customer success rep will get back in touch with you personally to answer any questions that you did have that we did not get to. If you do not know who your customer success rep is, you can email us at the customer success at globalsoftwareinc.com, generic mailbox, and we monitor that on a daily basis, obviously, and we'll get back in touch with you. Please remember that at the end of this, there is a short survey that will follow, along with the details on our next upcoming webinar. And actually, since it's January, I don't know that we've actually scheduled the February one yet, so you may not see that. But again, just go to the customer portal and our website to keep updated on what's up and coming. We're open to any of the feedback. Love to hear what you would like to see in future webinars. And so we rely on you to basically set the schedule for the remaining year. So remember, for your colleagues that were unable to attend, or if there were some things that you just didn't get the first time, they are recorded and will be placed on the portal in 7 to 10 business days for your convenience. So have a great afternoon, and we hope to see everyone next month. Thank you.